Did Apple actually invent anything? That's what we're talking about today. Wendell, did they invent anything? What do you think?
Well, I mean, invention is such a broad term. It's like when we're talking about like
we're already getting off to a bad start. When you start with the word "well," we're already getting off to a bad start. Let me preface this by saying we started this last week with a contest. I said if someone can name one thing that Apple invented on their own, it has to be hardware, not software, and it has to be after Wozniak left the company, because Wozniak was a genius and he invented lots of things. If you guys can name one thing that fits into those terms that they invented, you guys will win the SteelSeries Kana gaming mouse. So we've had a lot of entries, and we really had a secret motive with this because we wanted to get a message out there to everyone, especially all the fans out there who say Apple invents everything. They're such an innovator. Without them, the entire rest of the hardware and software world would be nothing. I've heard that way too much, and I'm not here to bash Apple. I actually have a few Apple devices, and I've owned Apple computers. I want Apple to stop all the nonsense that they're pulling right now. So here's what we are saying about Apple. Apple is not a technology invention company. Apple is a technology recipe company. They take interesting things that other people have done and they add a little garlic, maybe some cilantro, and they're like, blam, this is lovely. Look what we've come up with. And it's delicious, and you like it. And then you run around to all your friends and say, oh my God, look what Apple invented. Well, no, they did not invent most of the things. So we've had hundreds, almost 300 comments into this contest. And there's no clear winner yet, but we're going to name one soon. So do you have anything else to add to this before we get into some of the inventions?
No, it really looks interesting when you look at it from the perspective of having Apple's innovation. I mean, we're not saying that Apple doesn't innovate and that Apple doesn't, do a lot of really neat stuff. It's just that in terms of invention, it's really a stretch.
Right. Well, Steve Wozniak was the one who invented everything, and then Steve Jobs was the visionary. He would see something and say, hey, I really want this, but it doesn't exist. So let's find all the other companies that have the ingredients that we need and stir it up together and make something that I want. And so that's how he really, drove the company. But at the same time, he was also a little bit wacky. He would make something and then sue the companies that helped him make it because he was like, it's mine now. So Apple is still continuing that nonsense with the whole, wedge-shaped laptops. Now they're trying to put anybody else who makes a web-shaped laptop out of business. They want all tablets with curved edges off the market. So it's beyond just being like a very specific specification. You're like, hey, this is a design that we have. It's exactly like this. If you make something that looks exactly like our product, we will sue you. That's totally fine, and we're here to say that that's fine. However, this whole vague nonsense, we're like, yeah, tablets that look kind of like ours from across the room, no, those have got to go. And laptops that are shaped like laptops, now, those have got to go too. So this whole vague nonsense is abuse of the system, and they're using the courts as a business tool to put other companies either out of business or push other companies out of their area. So let's talk about some of the different things that people thought that Apple had invented, and we'll tell you who really invented them all right now. All right. First off, Firewire, because Apple did have Firewire on some of their older computers. Actually, Firewire was Texas Instruments, Sony, Digital Equipment Corporation, IBM, Intel, ANMOS, SNS, Thomson. Just all these different companies worked on Firewire. Someone else said Newton. Nope. PDA came way before the Newton. Apple just said, hey, that's pretty cool. We should do something better. And then Newton sucked anyway.
It's almost like they changed the recipe.
Like, we just add a little bit of garlic and, oh, Newton. We've invented the Newton. And if it's also kind of rough when, Steve Jobs would always hop up on stage and be like, look what we have invented. So that also makes it kind of difficult to understand. Thunderbolt. Apple's did have Thunderbolt just about before anybody else, but that is Intel all the way. Intel designed and created Thunderbolt, which is awesome. And there's also Thunderbolt on PC devices, motherboards, and that sort of thing. How about MagSafe? The magnetic connector that goes onto the AC adapter of the Mac? They do have a patent on that. And someone mentioned, hey, they've got a patent on this. Asian crockery has been using that for years and years and years. Asian rice cookers, Asian electric pans. It just made sense. They just didn't patent it because it was like, yeah, of course, if someone trips over this, we don't want a fire to start. It'll come unplugged. So that's been around for a long time. They just took it and made it their own and patented it. Someone said studio displays. So let me get this straight. Apple invented big monitors, okay? Somebody else said the cloverleaf button and the Apple command button. I'm just going to skip over that. Mini DisplayPort. Now, this one is interesting because Apple did come up with this because they needed something that would fit their small-bodied laptops. and a DisplayPort was already a standard, so it's really iffy because all they did was take a standard that already exists and squish it down into a smaller adapter. And then nobody wanted to use it, so then they said, hey, we made this smaller adapter, and they gave it away for free.
The Visa Standards Committee adopted it a year later after Apple went royalty free. So
the person that said the mini DisplayPort, I'm going to give them one entry. There's a couple people that we're going to enter in and then draw a name out of a hat, but man, we're really stretching it there. But mini DisplayPort, yeah. How about the dogcow, the bitmap image that came with one of the first Macintosh computers?
I don't think so.
Yeah, that's so funny. People put that.
I mean, honestly, we're really reaching here. This is sad.
I got one 30-pin dock connector. You know, like you plug into the bottom of your iPod.
I don't think so.
Oh no, nope.
Yeah,
Motorola.
Yeah, I mean, there's Motorola's got a really great patent on it, and we'll post a link to that on that type of technology. But in terms of like having a generic plug that can polymorph into, you know, whatever kind of connector you need, be it USB or video out or whatever, or charging.
Firewire even.
Yeah, no, I mean, that technology's been around since the dawn of time, literally. I mean, one of the patents, the patent that we're going to post references goes back to 1963.
Mac came out, right? And the problem with Mac is that a lot of people had Apple IIe's, and they were relying on Apple IIe's for business. And they couldn't use any of their Apple IIe programs on the Mac. So Apple released the Apple IIe card for the Mac. That's a very good one because they did put that together, but it was all Wozniak's technology. It's basically a Wozniak machine onto a different PCB slapped into the Mac. As you said it earlier, you go ahead and do your monologue on this.
Well, you know, you can't, I mean, okay, so you have two different products that are called Apples. You have the Apple IIe, which is a fundamentally different platform than the Macintosh. And so people were like, wait, I don't understand. I can't go from my Apple II to my Macintosh even though they're apples. It's apples to oranges. So Apple literally took the Apple IIe apple and stuck it inside the orange that is the Macintosh. Honestly.
Recipe. Delicious. Okay, how about Apple TV? No, guys. Microsoft even had some products to the market before that with their media center TVs. It was an all-in-one solution, but they didn't invent any of the technology, and the technology used inside wasn't even their own. So, someone said the MacBook Pro, featuring the Power PC and then the Intel.
I don't think so.
That's IBM and then Intel on the inside. No, they just made a very small laptop that was nice. Apple logo, someone said. Well, in Genesis 3:6, Eve took a bite of the apple, therefore making the first Apple logo. Apple QuickTake, that was the digital camera that came out. Well, Kodak was making a digital camera, and Fuji had some stuff going on as well. So Apple got in bed with Fuji and Kodak, and they made the terrible QuickTake camera. OS 9 was a mess, and Apple made that by themselves. And I wanted to mention, that their new operating system is not Apple. It is Unix BSD based. They just, basically made a new kernel for it.
They totally got caught with their pants down on OS 9.
OS 9 was a mess. It was almost as bad as the Lisa operating system. But go ahead and...
Well, I mean, OS 9 was so bad. It wasn't multiprocessor. It was crashy. It was poorly designed. It was, 10 years of hackery and spaghetti code, and not really hiring operating system engineers to do the work, and just it was terrible. So they adopted Unix, which is 30 years of stability, BSD to be specific, to use that in OS 10, and that's worked out really well. That has been a 10-year platform for them, and it has been incredibly extensible. And they've hired some people that know what they're doing. But OS 10, Apple, no. OS 9, maybe, but we're not talking about software.
Yeah, we're not talking about software. And also, even though we're not talking about software, someone said the App Store. Ubuntu did that 2 years earlier. Then Apple just said, hey, we like that recipe, let's make it better.
Oh, I think I also saw a mention of like iOS, but iOS was a convenient side effect of having gone to Unix, because having gone to Unix, the platform is very extensible to other platforms. So they were able to adapt the OS 10 kernel for mobile, which they got a lot of kudos for, but, that's... Unix is designed to be that.
It's still the backbone. Is not Apple. It's still Unix. How about the iPad? A lot of people said iPad. Have you ever heard of the gridpad from 1989? A DOS-based tablet, the first true tablet.
As a matter of fact, I have. Or any one of the dozens of Windows tablets that came after that.
Now that Microsoft is making the Surface, everyone's like, "Oh my God, they're ripping off Apple." No. And there are patents for tablet-like devices going back as far as 1942, so that is not Apple at all. The MP3 player, the first MP3 player, it was the Diamond Rio. Sorry, guys. Someone said inductive charging, like you could put your device close to a charger and then they would inductively charge. Palm was doing that way before Apple. And then have you guys ever heard of a guy named Nikola Tesla?
He did everything with inductors.
Even cats, right?
Yeah, even
He
cats.
was charging cats with induction. How about the iPhone? Ever heard of a company called Linksys? Well, Linksys had a phone out. It was a regular phone, mind you, but it was called the iPhone. Apple decided to go ahead and make an iPhone, and they just allowed Linksys to sue them over the years, and they just buried them in paperwork and money. So that's what happened with that. All right, the Apple Pippin. So in 1994-95, Bandai came to Apple and like, hey, let's make a game console type thing or like a really awesome multimedia device for the television. And Apple's like, okay, cool, let's do that. And then they talked to IBM and got a Power PC. So it was Bandai and IBM all involved in this. It was not Apple, and it was a mess anyway. The Apple A5, the processor that is in the current iPad. Well, this is an interesting story. Go ahead and tell them about the whole Intel mess.
Okay, so, and this is partly rumor, partly speculation, partly things pieced together from books, so take it with a grain of salt. But Apple originally approached Intel when Intel was doing the whole Atom thing and said, goodness, we've got this OS X, we've moved to the x86 platform. At Intel, please, if you can give us like a 5-watt version of the Atom, we're going to put that in phones and we're going to take over the world and it's going to be the most awesome thing in the world. Steve Jobs really, really, really lobbied Intel to have them produce low-power hardware. Didn't say what for, but it turned out it was for the iPhone and similar portable devices. And it would have been really convenient for Apple to have the x86 platform there because of all their work on OS X. So, long story short, Intel wouldn't budge. Intel being the multi-billion-dollar company that they are, were like, that's nice, Steve, whatever, we're not going to do that. And that really, really pissed him off.
He was like livid.
Yeah, he absolutely lost his mind. I mean, he was, if it weren't for the Intel ultra-low power i5s on the horizon, the first generation MacBook Airs would have probably been based on an AMD chip instead of an Intel chip because the AMD chips had much better performance per watt. Mm-hmm. But AMD didn't have anything that could touch the i5, and Intel was showing Steve Jobs engineering samples and stuff like that. It's like, look, we've got this new architecture. It's going to be awesome, but for now you've got to deal with the ultra low voltage Core 2 Duos. And so, I mean, just by a thread, Steve Jobs went with Intel over AMD. But I think his preference was AMD. I think the prototypes for the MacBook Air were all AMD based.
And he couldn't do anything with it for the pads, for the iPads and the iPhones. So he contacted ARM, and he told ARM exactly what he wanted. And this is where it gets a little sketchy because did Apple actually design this? I mean, it's made by ARM Holding. It's based on the ARM processor, and the graphics chip is Power VR. So it sounds like another case of Apple saying, hey, this is the recipe we want. And at this point, they have so much money that they can tell ARM and they can tell Power VR to build them the exact ingredients that they need for their machine. So they're not actually shopping around for ingredients. They're telling these companies like ARM, build this. We want this ingredient in our stew. So ARM built it for them. I'm going to go ahead and throw that one in the drawing because that one was made exactly, specifically for the Apple, even though it wasn't like made by Apple. So
I think Apple absorbed a few sort of hardware engineering groups or firms, like some smaller organizations. So that one maybe. I mean, possibly.
Mm-hmm. Oh, how about the first laptop ever with a handle?
No.
Oh, how about this DataView 25 here from like 1985? Would you look at that?
That's called the lunchbox form factor.
And this folds up. We've taken this apart here. But this keyboard here is wireless. It's infrared. An infrared keyboard from 1985. And
it's almost like the predecessor to the iPad with the Bluetooth keyboard.
and that just folds in right there.
A much more bulky and scary version that doesn't have any touch or mouse input capabilities.
Unibody. The unibody used in the latest MacBook Air. Well, go ahead with that.
Well, you gotta, to look at unibody, you gotta understand. The manufacturing process for unibody is that they've basically got a solid hunk of aluminum and then a computer-controlled cutting machine basically machines the thing out of a single block of aluminum. 1, very slow. 2, incredibly wasteful. No person in their right mind would use that for a manufacturing process. But I think Apple on their campus had a a lab where this type of work is done. It's called CNC machining. And so they had a CNC lab somewhere on their campus, I think, and they would make prototypes for Steve Jobs to mess around with. You know, the back of the iPad, the, you know, keyboard cutouts for the iPad, and they hit on a design aesthetic that they really liked. But, you know, again, the motivation here was aesthetics. It was not really the drive of invention. Now, this process is very similar to the way that parts are machined for aircraft out of aluminum, because if you cast aluminum, meaning that you heat it up and pour it into a cast aluminum is not nearly as strong as machined aluminum, and that's why they do that for aircraft. So their proto lab, you know, had all these CNC machines. They fell in love with it, and then it was like, okay, how do we mass produce this? It's like, well, you're going to need a lot of CNC machines doing a lot of stuff. So Apple really had to invent the machining process to do this in bulk, but it's because nobody's crazy enough to be that wasteful.
It really is. I mean, Sony had something similar with the Sony Z505. That was cast though.
Yeah, it was the Z505 was a magnesium case, and it was cast and then machined, precision machined to get it down to tolerance. And that was, you know, a hard metal case, and it was a really slick laptop. It has a cult following.
Right.
It was very thin, very small.
There's also the Lenovo, the carbon fiber Lenovo.
Yeah, Lenovo's got a carbon fiber case laptop as well, so it's kind of neat.
Okay, so I'm going to give 1 point to the person who said unibody, because that's pretty good. I think a couple of people said unibody, but I'll throw that in there. And lastly, someone said they invented the legacy-free PC. So that's how far we got on this contest. People were saying that, you know, like taking a CD-ROM drive and a floppy drive out of a computer is a new invention. That's how far we were stretching things. So
that's really sad and depressing.
Yeah, again, we're not trying to bash Apple here. We truly want Apple to stop harassing all the other companies out there. I was talking to one of my other friends, and he said that, you know, this is just what businesses do. They try to protect their investments. No, this is absolutely insane. Samsung does not do stuff like this. Other companies, Intel, they work together. They want to move things forward. Apple is holding the industry back by arguing over rectangles with curved edges and wedge-shaped laptops. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Apple's attitude is tantamount to, well, you guys couldn't get the tablet thing right. We got it right. We should own the entire tablet market for at least 10 years, and no one should be allowed to make a tablet.
Right. Tim Cook even said, why should we come up with everything and allow everyone else to benefit from it? So I think in his brain, he may be a sociopath, but he thinks that they came up with all this stuff, and everyone else is basically just benefiting and, sucking on the teeth of Apple. So that's not what's happening out there. It's ridiculous.
He's come up with a delicious recipe for chocolate cake, and we'd had chocolate before, and we had cake, and if we're talking about the iPad in the form of other tablets, but their chocolate cake has frosting with just a hint of mint, and everyone goes nuts over it. And that exact recipe, that's fine. But now the cat's out of the bag with chocolate cake, and everybody's going to have their own kind of chocolate cake. That's just how that goes.
And Apple just has to chill and let it happen.
Pretty much, unless they invented chocolate or cake.
So I'll put the link in the description here. You guys can still jump in there. I'm going to pick the best 2 or 3 and put them in a hat and draw for this. If someone comes up with something really amazing, maybe I'll throw another prize in there. I don't know. I'm feeling generous today. So there you have it. And share this with all your friends. Again, I don't hate Apple. I just wish they'd stop this nonsense.
They're a recipe company.
Yeah, they really are a recipe company. Apple, the recipe company. Share it with your Mac friends especially, because I want them to be more informed when they have arguments. I really do. I'm sick of going into coffee shops and having them say something like, chocolate cake is good. If you can replace the word apple with the word chocolate cake in their sentences, there's absolutely nothing good that's going to come out of their mouth. Shut up, but I love chocolate cake. Well then, what's going on over there? I think it's time to go do something else. All right, subscribe. Thank you guys for all subscribing. The website is going crazy. I'll see you guys on Tech Syndicate.